Welcome to the Theo Therapist Podcast, where theologically trained licensed therapists share health and healing conversations. Join our host, Dr. Trice Glenn, for conversations about real-life issues from both theological and therapeutic perspectives.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Theo Therapist Podcast. My name is Dr. Trice Glenn, and I am the host of the Theo Therapist Podcast, where we have real talk with therapists and those who are connected to mental health and the intersection of theology. So today I have one of my favorite guests with us, someone that's close to me because we went to seminary together, and that is Dr. Jacqueline Dowdy. Welcome, 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 welcome. She is an author, a speaker, a strategist, a leadership coach, consultant, and she has a rich spiritual and ministry background. Dr. Dowdy holds degrees in accounting and divinity and business administration, as well as she's an author. She's authored a book called More Than Conquerors, 31-Day Declarations of Experience as a faith-filled mindset. I think that was close. I may have missed it a little bit, but I know Dr. Dowdy will correct me and she will fix it up for me. And she is preparing to launch her second book, The D3 Leadership Blueprint, Turning Delays, Deficits, and Deceptions into Triumphs. I am really looking forward to hearing more about that. Thank you for coming to visit us today. I'm so glad you're here. How's it going today?
Great. How are you today? It's good to be with you.
I'm doing great. You know, I am happy whenever I get a chance to see one of my friends on the Theo Therapist Podcast. It gives me an opportunity to kind of share this wonderful intersection of those that I know have had a commitment to theological training and education and have gone out and found a space for ministry that intersects that with whatever the passions are that they have.
Absolutely.
And so this is a topic that, you know, is so real for me and many of the people in ministry that I work and serve alongside of. Today's topic for this particular podcast is navigating leadership and healing. Now, that is an intersection point. That is a space that so many of us find ourselves in who are called into leadership roles, whether that's in a church congregation, an organization, a nonprofit, maybe corporate, you know, because many of us are bi-vocational. And so for those of us who are therapists, we're called into a leadership role as well because our leadership is usually in private practice or something to that degree. So we intersect with leadership and mental health and faith in a very unique way. Those of us who kind of operate in my space, but I'm glad to get your perspective today. So first of all, once again, thank you and welcome for being here. I'm curious, when I invited you to the podcast, what were your thoughts about coming on here?
Well, when I saw Theo Therapist and really knowing you, the person you are, and some of the conversations that we've had even in the past, when we were all in seminary and we would gather and talk about things, it really is all about leadership. And with leadership, you have to really take care of your mind, your body, your spirit. And I mean, in leadership, it comes a lot of demands. And our mental health is very important for us to continue
Absolutely.
to function and to be effective in whatever we're doing.
And, you know, I think that leads us to the guiding question for today's podcast. Each podcast, I have a guiding question that somewhat just kind of guides the conversation and dialogue we'll have. And that question this time is, what are some ways that our faith and mental health intersect in our leadership? And that's such a big question, but it's such an important question. I don't think people often look at that triad of faith, mental health, and leadership, right? Like, what are those intersection points look like? And what are some ways that we can be intentional in looking at that? When you think of a question like that, what comes up for you?
It's a loaded question, but it all is integrated with each other because,
Mm-hmm.
you know, in my leadership experience, I've been in organizations that have had many, many challenges, whether it was in higher education or running a not for profit. And I was a CEO of a behavioral health not for profit. And so, in both of those arenas, there's a lot of stress, there's a lot of challenges that we have to face, a lot of decisions to be made. And so, my faith had to get me through those leadership challenges. Um,
Absolutely.
and not only that, I had to really learn how to take care of myself mentally because, for an example, even running a not for profit, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
all of the different challenges that come with that, whether it's funding, whether it's the environment, or whatever the case may be, those were challenges that, as a CEO, that keeps you up at night, keeps you
Right.
on your
I'm sure they
knees,
do.
and keeps you on your knees. And so I had to be honest, I didn't do a very good job of taking care of myself.
Mm.
My focus was taking care of the staff, taking care of the clients that we serve, taking care of the community, and making sure we had what we needed. And I did not take care of myself well. And so that's how I just sort of, when the Lord just said, "Hey, it's time for you to leave," I wasn't obedient in leaving,
Mm.
because you know how we are as women. When we've been called to do something, then our goal is to finish what we started.
We have a
So
hard time taking our hands off the plow.
we have a hard time letting go. And so, and still at that very moment, I still thought about the organization. It's been in
Mm.
the community for 50 years. Thought about the people we were serving who relied on our services. I thought about the staff, who has, and some of them that were very committed to the organization, and their families. I thought about all of that. Um, and instead of leaving, I tried to find other ways in which, to really save the organization, um, reorganize the organization, and even establish some partnerships. All that fell apart. And while all of that fell apart, guess what? I fell apart. And what I
Mm-hmm.
mean by falling apart, I came to the realization that it was time for me to let go. And I heard the Holy Spirit tell me it was time,
Mm-hmm.
but I decided to keep going. So that was a great lesson for me to learn. And so when I did finally come out of that, um, there was a lot of experiences that I've had over the years, not just there, but over the years. And as I began to think about that, I thought about, I said, Lord, I experienced so much deception. And I said, and all the delays and everything that we were trying to accomplish. And I've been in organizations where we were, was dealing with funding issues, and there was deficits that we had to work through and cut budgets and things like that. And really, in those situations, you really become, people don't really like you that much, that well, because you
It's
have
a
to make
hard place to be
tough
in.
decisions, right? And so, in all of that, that's how I began to really reflect and ponder on this D3 leadership blueprint. Because what I realized is that, I have all these degrees, but they never teach you how to navigate in these spaces where you're experiencing delays, deficits, and deception. And I'm not just talking about just within the organization, but the delays and deceptions and deficits can happen in your own personal life. Um,
Absolutely.
it can happen in the workforce, or the workforce that you have that's working, your teams, and it can happen within the environment. And so as I thought about that, I'm like, man. And so what I started doing was looking up these 3D words from a biblical perspective. And I found that the Bible addresses all of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started writing on it and really reflecting on it. And it's sort of, and I know that when I started out ministry, um, I knew that I was called to a more integrated ministry, which
Right.
included business and my Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
Talking about both. It was integrated, and so I have been spending a lot of time in the past years in really asking God to bring me clarity on what that integration looks like. Now, I was in that place where I thought I was there because not only was I CEO running that organization, I was pastoring. It was a part-time pastorate, but I was working full-time because I wanted to make sure that I was
Mm-hmm.
serving the people that was in the church to the best of my ability. I mean, I did not want to cut corners on them. And so there again, I never didn't think about myself. It was just always serving and pouring out to other people. And I
And
think I just didn't know how to
that
take
cup
care of
gets empty. Right.
myself.
You know, there's so many people I think that resonate with your story and what you've shared so far. So many people, regardless of what types of leadership roles they have been at that place where they've reached some, connection point to deception and deficit and, delays, things that don't happen in the way that you want them to. And anytime you're a leader, you're very familiar with these three Ds, right? But then I think even more so when we have that intersection of kind of faith leader and leadership roles in other areas, like those of us called to be bivocational. And for those of you listening who may not know bivocational, it means that in addition to our call and our ministry service, we also have some type of either employment or some type of other function outside of the church walls that usually is another part of our livelihood or just another part of the role that we have in the world. And it is being, called and pulled upon in both of those places where we are constantly pouring out and constantly being called upon. And that by itself is taxing for anyone, no matter how spiritually fed you are and spiritually filled you
Absolutely.
are. That's taxing. And then
Yes.
to do it from a leadership standpoint in multiple spaces, you can only imagine how amplified that is. And so I appreciate your honesty and your authenticity, like
Yes.
being genuine about having taken the time, reflected on, what was pulled on you, how you responded, and kind of where you are now. I mean, I think that is the first step to, just making a major transformation, right? And
Ab-
helping others because you've been that way now.
Yes.
I would add one other thing that just resonates with that point about me, is that after the pandemic, and so many of us pastors were pouring out to people and those of us who were bivocational and pastoring during the pandemic, there was such a large wave of burnout amongst clergy, right after the pandemic because they had been pouring out 70, 80 hours a week, during the pandemic. And it just got to a place where people felt so depleted that they couldn't continue to give. And so that's another aspects of this intersection of faith and mental health and leadership that I'm just so glad that you're bringing to the forefront because we need to have those conversations. So we're going to dive in. We're just touching the surface. I know we're going to dive even further. But before we go further, I do want to ask, and I ask all of my folks, kind of how did you get connected to this intersection point? There's so few of us who, find this bivocational intersection between, faith journey and business professional or mental health professional. How'd you get connected in this way?
Well, I mean, for years I worked in not for profit and I loved it because I love serving people and helping people. And more in the spaces of, helping people who can't really help themselves. So
Mm-hmm.
I started working in not for profit and really understanding the dynamics of the work and the people that we were serving. And so I've always been a servant leader. And so as when God called me to seminary, that's when I knew that my ministry was integrated, because I had this business mind, very strategic. I had this huge vision, and so when I started looking for a seminary, that's how I met you, because at Mercer University there was a program that allowed us to have do a seminary and also attach the business administration to it.
Mm.
So that's how I came into that. And so I continued that by getting my MBA. And I worked in higher ed for about 13, 14 years. But this integration is a way that I see ministry, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm using all of the gifts and the talents that God has blessed me with to be a blessing to the kingdom. And that was very exciting for me, because I could be bivocational, but also be able to have an impact on the lives of people, on communities. And so that's what really like helped mold me into my integration of ministry, because
Mm-hmm.
one, I knew I needed to make some money, but two, I knew I wanted to serve people. And so my prayer has been, God, help me to bring this ministry together so that I can be that servant leader, and take everything that you've given me and make it a reality. So I started my business in North Carolina, Vision in Action, LLC. I started that in North Carolina. And when I moved to Atlanta for seminary, I incorporated it in Atlanta as well. And then when I moved to Florida, I incorporated it in Florida. Now that I'm back in North Carolina, it's incorporated here. And so what I've done since I've sort of come full circle after my burnout period, I picked it back up, and now I feel like I am moving it forward. And it's almost like, a vision God gives you. And
Mm-hmm.
along the way, I have put it on the shelf, but now I'm picking it back up. But He's given me a whole new perspective. And I also invested in myself. I invested in a coach.
Awesome.
And having a coach has helped me to, especially after the things that I went through from my previous employment and pastoring. um, he really helped me spiritually, and also in how to pick up my vision and get it moving again,
Mm-hmm.
get it moving. And so he's been a great inspiration to me. By the way, his name is Israel Duran. Awesome man of God who has really poured into my life and made a big difference. And he came into my life at a time that I was really going through and was mentally drained, physically drained, and spiritually drained. And so not only did he coach me on business, but he coached me spiritually. And so I connected with him because he also has that integration of ministry. He teaches business, but he integrates it with biblical principles. And so I really resonated with him. And so he's been a great blessing to me. But what I had to do before I even got to this point, I wrote a book, a devotional book, the one that you mentioned, More Than
Mm-hmm.
Conquerors, 31 daily declarations to experience a faith-filled mindset. And I had to write that book because when you're in a transition in your life, you got to have a mindset change.
Absolutely.
You can't like try to just dive into something, right? Before you heal inside out, and then your mind has been transformed to really think about, where you're going, and to really um believe in yourself, believe in where you're going. And one of the things that Israel Durant did for me in my last meeting with him, in-person meeting, is he wrote out this chart. And the chart on one side is, this is what how Christianity see it. Becoming or being, doing, and having, right? And you know that from seminary, that was the
I
motto
do.
of,
Knowing, being, doing.
yes. And then on the other side, he had the world's perspective. The world's perspective was doing, being, and having. And so what I realized is that when I started on my professional journey in leadership, I was excited, I was doing it, and I was on this side of being, doing, and having. But somewhere down the line, through those 17 years, I lost my being. Yes, I lost my being. And so I didn't, that light bulb just went off like maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. And when that went off for me, it was like, okay, I know where I am now. I know what I need to do. I know what direction I'm going in. Although I know I need more clarity on things, but I get it now. I get it. I lost my being. So now it's time for me to regain my being, regain myself, right? And the Lord's been dealing with me on resetting. He's like,
Yes.
I'm going to go through a
Reconnect to the
process
source.
of resetting, rejuvenation, and then reignite. And so right now I am preaching on resetting. And I'll tell you, I'm like, Lord, you just show me everything I need to know about how I need to reset and what this reset means in my life. And I'm telling you, it has made a huge difference in my life in really hearing God and really allowing the Holy Spirit to just pour into me about me, where I am. And I'm excited because I regained myself, I wasn't feeling myself. I was like, who am I? And so as leaders, you got to come to that place of just looking yourself in the mirror and you got to say, I need some help. You got to say, you know what? I can't do this anymore. You got to say, Lord, just deliver me from myself and deliver me from this situation that I'm in and just work things out for my good. But here's the thing. When God does it, you got to hear that too.
Right.
And be able to move when he says move. And so when I stayed, I ended up having to be out of work for 30 days. My doctor said, you got to be out for 30 days.
You got to take care of yourself. Yeah.
You can't do this. You gotta take a break. She made me take a break for 30 days. And guess what? I still didn't take a break because I was still working. And then things just started falling down. Nobody knew what I was going through. All people were worried about was the organization and what we gonna do, but I'm sitting there like, man, I don't know what we're going to do. So what I'm saying is, leaders, don't get to a point where you are like just stuck,
Right.
You can't make a decision. You can't move because you're so overwhelmed and mentally strained that you're paralyzed. And I believe that's what happened to me. But I'm here today and God is still restoring.
And blessing so many people with the honesty, right? That you're able and willing and have the courage to share. I am a firm believer you can't heal from anything you won't acknowledge. You have to acknowledge where the hurt is, where the pain is,
Mm-hmm.
where the darkness is, in order for that thing to be healed and restored, right?
Absolutely.
And what you share, I mean, it resonates so much with me and so many of the stories that I hear. You know, I spend my day talking to leaders, and I promise you, it just resonates so much because so many people, particularly women, who feel drawn, pulled, purposed, called into some form of leadership will push and push and push, even when the subtleties are saying, hold on, take a breath. You're
Mm-hmm.
out of balance. You're out of flow.
Mm-hmm.
You're off kilter. Something is not aligned with who you're supposed to be. But we will keep pushing because we're afraid to take our hand off that plow. There's something that says, either I'm failing if I do it, or I can't do it because too many people are depending on me. And the challenge with that is it doesn't usually end well. It ends, but maybe not well, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
And it's recognizing that even if it does not end well, there's still restoration. There's still a reconnection, a repurposing, get reconnected to self, get a reset, get with somebody that you trust to walk that journey with you. I'm so glad your coach walked with you, and
Yes.
your coach, kind of helped you reconnect with your journey. And out of it came this D3, this work that's
Yes.
going to help other leaders,
Yes.
because leaders don't often sit and allow themselves to talk about the things that are kind of attacking the leadership in their mental health and what that looks like, how to stay, grounded in their faith while they're dealing with delays. They just want to act like the delays aren't there. You
Yeah.
know, when
You
the
do.
deficits are there, we just want to act like
Yeah.
there are no deficits. We'll just find a plan for it,
Right.
right? I
You are
know
so
the
right.
Jedi mind trick. I hear it every day. But the
Yes.
reality is, once again, you have to acknowledge in order to heal from something.
Yes, you do.
You were going to say something else?
Well, I mean, I agree totally with what you're saying. And and it was through the mistakes too that you make as a leader. We don't, as leaders, you don't want to make mistakes, but I am learning that it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't know it all, it's okay. If you make a mistake, it's okay if you make the wrong decision. Guess what? Those mistakes and those wrong decisions are there for us to help us. They're actually opportunities for us to grow. And so I'm having to really look at things from that perspective and say, that's an opportunity for me to grow, right?
Right.
Because a lot of times we're so hard on ourselves
Mm-hmm.
as leaders because we're the ones that everybody's looking at, and everybody expect everything from us. And even as a pastor, as a CEO, you're always have this stature that you uphold, and it's hard for a lot of leaders to be transparent, right? Because
Absolutely.
they're afraid of judgment. They're afraid of people really seeing the true leader. But I'm learning that it's okay that people see the true leader, because in order for us as leaders to really help people and guide people, they have to see the authenticity that we have,
Mm-hmm.
right? And in order to be a transformation leader, they have to see that somehow you're not just trying to help them transform, but you've been
You
transformed as
also.
well. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like our testimony of leadership to help other people to overcome those obstacles and those challenges that we face. And I mean, that's a deficit, right?
It
In our
is.
lives. That's a deficit. And it's also deception, because if you think that you're not you're just always on top, you're deceiving yourself.
Mm-hmm. And
We always want to be on our A games, but things happen.
I think that's when our ego/pride gets in the way. We don't want to admit that we don't have it all together. We don't want to admit that, perhaps we're not on top of everything. And we all know that that comes before a fall. So I think it's important for us, once again, to have a space of recognition that we do have limitations. And if you're doing it in your own might without, being led by faith, your grounding, your own might can't continue. It can't sustain everything. And so you got to find a way to replenish your mental health. Like, I often talk to my leaders and I ask, what are you doing that's life giving? Like, what's that thing that you do that's not about leadership? It's not about pouring out to anybody else. What is that thing that you're doing for you? And by life giving, I mean, it's like a breath of fresh air for you. I don't care if it's going and sitting in the park and people watching, or if it's travel or whatever your thing is, but what is feeding life and air back into your lungs? What spaces have you created for yourself where you don't have a role and you don't have a responsibility? People make a lot about self-care, but I often ask people, do you have any spaces where somebody's not calling you by a title and you don't have a responsibility to somebody?
Right.
And if you have those spaces, how often are you going there? Because if we're not being intentional to make sure that we are protecting, that light that we have, it'll
Mm-hmm.
get really dim.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Wow.
I'm going to turn the tide a little bit and talk to something that I just hear so much from leaders in general. Like I said, I deal with a lot of leaders in my practice. And office politics comes up all the time when we talk about leaders and leadership. And I know that's a bit of a shift from where we have been, but I want to speak to something that also is applicable to a lot of leaders.
Yes.
Who find themselves in situation with different people jockeying for different types of pull and push and notoriety, and sometimes are doing so with a lot of very interesting motives. And leaders get kind of caught up in that and having to sift through that.
Mm-hmm.
And I like to say use a whole lot of discernment to figure out, what spirits you're dealing with and,
Yes.
and what's in the midst of you. But I'm curious, when you think about leadership and that intersection for you, has office politics ever been something that you've had to deal with?
Absolutely. And that's why I talk about the deception, right? Because with the
Mm-hmm.
office politics, that's where you deal with the deception. Because, yes, you're right. You have to really be able to discern. And one of the things I was talking the other day is that, when you're hiring people, your team, right? Especially your leadership core,
Mm-hmm.
you got to really be discerning. One of the things that I learned is that I was hiring for expertise and I was hiring for people who knew how to get the work done, but I left out emotional intelligence and I
Mm.
left out whether they were a good fit for our environment, for our
Wow.
culture, right? And so that's where leaders have to be discerning, because I was at that point focused on, okay, I need somebody who can come in and get it done, who understands what they're doing, um, who have the credentials to make it happen. And so being blindsided by that, I got caught up in some deception, because
Mm-hmm.
that person, although they had those credentials and that experience, their emotional intelligence was not a good fit
Mm-hmm.
for our culture and for our environment, and especially being on my team. And so you can be deceived by people, and you have to be very discerning. And that's why I think your faith has to come into action
Yes.
when you're dealing with people, and making sure you have the right people around you, because you should have a team of folk around you that you can be transparent with, who who are um, who have bought into the vision, and who are team players, and who are willing to carry out the deliverables, to obtain the deliverables and really move the agency or the organization forward. Um,
Right.
And so, and you want a team that when you're not in place, that team is in place and it can keep on moving and working. And so I learned when I was out on my 30 days that the team, now this was a new kind of a new team at the end, but it was not moving and working like it should have.
Mm.
And so I learned from that experience. And so leaders have to be very discerning. The politics can be deceiving because you got to understand the motivations behind what's going on around you and behind what people say to you. And if you have a question in your mind about it, then that means you need to give that question some attention so that you can, be prayerful about it and be
Right.
able to make the best decisions.
And I do. I mean, I think that's one of the gifts that we can thank Spirit for, right? Is if you have a strong prayer life, you're not just going into these decisions logically, right? You also want to make sure that you're making the best decision for those that you need to lead and the team you need to lead at this moment, right? It's not to
Yeah,
discriminate against others, but it's to recognize, is this the fit for you in this moment? And am I getting grounded enough in my being that I can recognize that this is the best fit in this moment?
yeah. But when you are burnout and you making
Mm-hmm.
decisions, yeah.
You just pick someone.
I mean, and I think, at the end, that's where I was. I was burnt out. And all I could think about is I need somebody who can carry out, who can do this work, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so as leaders, you got to step back. You got to know when to step back, take care of yourself,
Definitely.
rejuvenate, because when you go in there and have to make those tough decisions, you cannot be mentally distressed. You cannot be burned out. You cannot be unfocused. You got to be able to really make those good decisions with a sane mind, um, and feeling good physically,
Mm-hmm.
mentally, spiritually, and when things are just in disarray with you, it's hard to make great decisions.
It is. I think that's why being grounded is so important,
Hmm.
because when we're just unmoored, we're just floating. It's hard for us to figure out where ground is, much less be able to help others land. And I think that's the role of a leader. They've got to know what they can hold on to, and we can't help you where we're not currently. So,
Exactly.
man, this is such a rich conversation. We're drawing close to a close, but I have a few more questions. I
Okay.
have, man, we could do this for about an hour and a
Yeah,
half,
no,
but
it's very good.
I want to leave the people with some tangibles. What do you think are some leadership goals for them to strive to, kind of based on what we've been talking about today?
Well, one is to be able to assess any delays, right? When you have delays, whether it's individual delays or in your organization or team that you are leading in your churches, be able take time to assess where there are gaps that's
Mm,
causing the delays of things happening or things moving ahead. Take time to look at that and assess that, because maybe you may find that you got to make some changes.
right.
And so don't get so hasty in making decisions. Assess first. And secondly, um, when it comes to deficits, what I would say is deficits can be, financial deficits, and of course, you have to address that and see where the gaps are there and understand how you're going to fill that financial gap and what your resources look like, or if you have to do some budget cuts or whatever. Because sometimes we have to do those budget cuts, but we don't want to because we don't want people to lose their jobs and things like that. But you have to be able to manage those deficits individual deficits. As a person, you got to manage the deficits in your personal life. If you are deficient in taking care of yourself, you got
Mm.
to take time to manage that. If you're deficient in, you know, your team, your leaders that's around you in your circle, if they're deficient in some areas of their leadership, then you need to address those things, not just let them linger, but to address them. Because what I have found is if you allow them to linger, you don't address them, then it snowballs, and then you have a bigger problem. So you have to manage those deficits when you see them, um, in your organization, um, in your teammates, in your leaders that's there. Address them. And I know sometimes it's difficult for leaders to address difficult situations, but that's where your faith and your discernment comes in, and your emotional intelligence comes in, where you address those things. And also, mitigating the deceptions, right? We talked about being discerning. If you know and you feel in your heart and your spirit and your mind, your intuition, whatever, that this ain't really it, then don't deceive yourself. Go with
Right.
what you thought initially. Don't deceive yourself. If you see it, don't deceive yourself that it isn't what you thought it was anyway in the beginning, right?
That's
Because
good.
what I find is we'll see it and we'll see the problem. We know who is the problem. We know, even from a personal perspective, we know we got an issue. We know we have a problem. We know we're deceiving ourselves in some ways. Even if you're in a relationship, don't deceive yourself, right? If you know that there's a problem that exists, address it.
Mm-hmm.
Don't mitigate that deception, because we can have personal deception, relationship deception, uh, work deception, co-worker deception, whatever it is. And so we have to address it. In order to mitigate it, it has to be addressed.
It has to be. I liken that to kind of denial. And I usually tell my clients, denial just prolongs the suffering.
Yes,
Whatever you're avoiding, it's not going to get better just because you act like it's not there.
exactly.
If anything, it's going to get worse, and it's probably going to, expand and impact more than it's already impacting. So, rather than prolong the suffering, it may take some courage to address the things that you
Mm-hmm,
see. But
mm-hmm.
if God placed it in your spirit to see it, and you have an eye to see it, and then do accordingly, kind of what you're feeling led to do with that.
Exactly. Exactly.
Uh, this is so awesome. This is so rich. I almost want to do a part two, and we might at one point do a
That's
part two.
fine.
But I want to thank Dr. Dowdy for being here. I can't wait for this book to come out. This part two, this second book of hers, the D3 book. I definitely think that it is going to speak to my leaders, those of us who have grounding in our faith, and we recognize the importance of replenishing our mental health and staying restored and strong in our being so that we can be more effective leaders. I strongly encourage you to connect with her. I'm going to let her tell you how to find her. But make sure that when it comes out, I think later on this fall, that you jump on that book, leaders, because that is something that I think is going to bless your soul. It's going to enrich you. And so, can you tell us how to find you, your socials, your website? How do they find you, Dr. Dowdy?
Sure. If you go to www.dr Jacqueline, Jacqueline, Dowdy, DOWDY.com. You will find me, and it will take you to my other website, which is my Vision and Action Business Consulting website. So it's all connected. And also, my website is VIABS. That's my my Facebook is VIABS. And also my business Facebook is Jacqueline Dowdy. So you should be able to find me pretty easy.
Awesome. Well, thank you once again. We appreciate you all for coming and joining us on the Theo Therapist Podcast, where we have real talk at the intersection of theology and therapy. Once again, I hope that you will join us for each and every episode. If you haven't listened to all of our episodes, definitely check it out on any of your major platforms as well as YouTube. All of our previous episodes are there. In addition, visit our website, thetheotherapistpodcast.com. That's the Theo Therapist podcast.com. There you'll find links for all of our social media. Make sure that you give us a like, a follow, and subscribe. We definitely want to continue to share this message and the information that we have out here. Thank you so much again, Dr. Dowdy, for being here. We appreciate you. We look forward to having you back again. And you take care of yourself. Everybody take care and be well. God bless.
God bless. Thank you.
Theo Therapist Podcast, real talk at the intersection of theology and therapy. Check out Dr. Glenn's new journal series titled Brain Dump Journals for the Busy, available on Amazon. Visit our websites for more information at thetheotherapist.com or catriceglenn.com.